Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today, working at the fascinating intersection of science, technology, innovation, and national defense and security. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Robert Taguchi, who currently serves as the Chief of the Concepts Division, Force Modernization Directorate in the U.S. Army Special Operation Command, located in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Dr. Toguchi has spent over 30 years on active military duty while serving in a functional Area 59 strategist for the U.S. Army. Dr. Taguchi's past assignments have included a tour as the Director of Strategic Plans and the Chief of the Army Capabilities Integration Center, their initiatives group at TRADOC, the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. In the Pacific region, he spent a tour with the United States Pacific Command while serving as the Deputy Director and the Chief of Strategic Plans at the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Dr. Taguchi was also assigned back in the early 2000s to Africa, serving as a senior U.S. military observer to the UN mission in Liberia. And previous to that, he had served on the faculty and taught military strategy at the U.S. National War College, at the National Defense University. Additionally, in the D.C. area, he gained a lot of experiences in the halls of the Pentagon, serving as a strategist in the Strategy, Doctrine, and Concepts Division, in the Strategy and Policy Division of the Army, as well as a war planner in the War Plans Division. Dr. Taguchi has his bachelor's science degree focused on engineering from the U.S. Military Academy. He did a PhD in history from Duke University. And aside from all that, he's also an extremely accomplished author. You can find a lot of his titles, including the Competitive Advantage Special Operations Forces in Large-Scale Combat Operations, Land Warfare in the Information Age, The Enduring Relevance of Land Power, as well as the very interesting The Winning Habits of Steve Jobs. We are honored to have him with us today. Dr. Robert Taguchi, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you, Ira, for that great introduction. If I can just give a little bit of my background in terms of my family background.
Sure.
I'm from a family with a long military tradition. My two uncles served in World War II. One of them was in the 442nd Infantry Regiment and spent time in Italy and southern France at war. I've had relatives that were in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And then in my immediate family, my brother Miles was an Annapolis graduate, U.S. Naval Academy of 77, company 17. I went to West Point, and my three of my four children served in the military. So my oldest son spent time in Afghanistan with the 1st Cav Division. My daughter, Ashley, was in the 82nd Airborne in Iraq and in Afghanistan. My youngest son is still on active duty, and he's a CH-47 pilot down in Savannah in the 3rd ID. So I feel good that my kids have followed in the tradition and in service to the country. I guess my interest in concepts kind of started with working in plans. So when I was a lieutenant, I was at a Fort Ord, and I was a platoon leader XO, and they were very short on majors at the time. This is the kind of the post-Vietnam period, very short on officers. So they stuck me in a major's position as a lieutenant, and I was in division plans for the 7th Infantry Division. I started to to love working in plants at an early age. So later on, when I had the opportunity, instead of going back into engineering for graduate school, I applied to teach at West Point in military history because I thought there was a good fit between military history, military art and science, and being a war planner. So I really wanted to get into that area. And then one of my jobs when I was at Fort Stewart, my boss, General DeFrancisco, asked me, "What if there's any job in the Army you want?" Since he was a 2-star and he could recommend it, he said, "What would you want to be?" And I said, "I want to be a war plans officer in the Pentagon." So he said, "You got it." And and I got to then make that transition and became a 59 and a war planner, and that was pretty exciting. But then when I got close to retirement, I realized that what's the next iteration from war planning? It's probably concepts, because in the concepts field, you're kind of still involved with war planning, but you're looking even longer range. You're trying to come up with those technologies that really are going to shape the next conflict. And I really believe that if you got the technology right in the interwar period, then you're much more likely to win a war when you actually go to war, because there's no time in war to do that 10 or 15 years of development to be able to have something that's practiced, is trained on, it's integrated into the military system. So that's kind of why I ended up in concepts, and I got a really strange background of engineering and in history.
In history, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fascinating combination, and obviously you've been on this amazing journey, and I neglected to say, obviously, thank you and your whole family for the long service to the United States. But thinking about some of the things, and we'll go into sort of the details a little later on in the show, to some of these sort of frontier, sort of bleeding edge technologies that you're involved in. But I'd love to just start off in general with sort of the theme of concepts, because we on the show, we've had the honor of hosting a lot of thought leaders like yourself that are looking out sort of different time frames, different horizons. We've had folks on from DARPA, people from the Office of Naval Research, from Ensign, and so forth. Everyone has a different timeline. Some, short-term stuff, 6 to 18 months. Others that have several years to think about the big issues. Talk about concepts in general, what they are, why they're important to specifically special operations in your case, and a little bit about sort of where the directives come from. To say, Bob, we need this. We need to take a look at this, and we need to in an X years. Take us a little through that.
Yeah, I'm going to try to walk us into concepts a little bit. It is a favor, guy, that I'm here to talk about this. But I work for some great senior leaders. Lieutenant General Jonathan Braga is the commander of U.S. Army Special Operations Command. In my opinion, he's a truly visionary person. And the commander is going to want to get into the future for us to be successful. And he really wants to get into the future, deep future, look at those deep technologies. And I think he is truly a visionary in that area. And Colonel Joe Wortham is the Force Modernization Director, also fits in that category. And to walk into the space, one of the big ideas that General Braga has is the soft space cyber triad. And I'll touch on that as I go interview. So first of all, you have to work for a commander that really wants to get in the future, because you can have a concepts division and you can sit on the shelf and not do very much. But in his case, he's not allowed us to do a lot of things. And so when you get into concepts, it's kind of, we're in the deeper future. So if it's in the 0 to 2 current operations, those guys have got innovation with the commanders. In probably the 3 to 15 year, the POM, the 5-year plan, looking, with working on your investments, we have a different group of folks, combat developments, the G8 director that does that period. We're looking at the deep future, so 15, 20 years and further out. And they're expecting us to develop insights, identifying those key technologies, and then trying to talk about how do you operationalize those key technologies. So that context is really important. And we interface a lot with people in the technology area, like DARPA, the SCO, DIU, ARL, John Hopkins, APL, NATIC. We talk to them all the time, because unless you have a good understanding of the technologies that are emerging in 6.1, 6.2, you're not going to be very effective in concepts. So everything in future force development starts with a concept, and that's pretty much directed by Congress. It's directed by the Department of Defense, the Joint Staff, and they have doctrine established to say, if you don't have a concept, we're not going to approve your funding. So in many cases, the services even have to backtrack and write a concept to justify what they want to do, because the concept is the linkage between the national security strategy, national defense strategy, all the strategic guidance given from the president on down. Whatever we develop must be linked to that national guidance. Yeah. And then it must be linked to national defense planning scenarios. So Department of Defense give us scenarios, and if the technology doesn't fit in that scenario, then they don't need that technology. So we have to fit it with the scenarios, a good understanding. We have to also understand the war plans, and figure out how do we fit into those war plans. And then we're looking for the technology that is in what's emerging, and figuring out how do we integrate that technology. So concepts is the very beginning, and concepts is it's a visualization and a description of what you need. So it's more than a vision, because you have to describe how that technology is going to fit in to the entire military system and all of the functions. And so I'll give you an example of a concept. So one of them that the Army is very proud of is air-land battle, and everybody knows about that from the 1980s, 1982 to 1986. We came out of the Vietnam War floundering. Okay. We're used to fighting in the jungle with light infantry and not a lot of other capabilities. And now you're shifting back to the plains of Europe and expecting a large-scale confrontation with the former Soviet Union. And that mindset had to change. So we have several iterations. We had a 1978 concept, and we had a 1982 concept. By 1986, they finally matured air-land battle, which is getting after the deep operations, targeting the second echelon, so that you're not waiting until they're all on the forward line of troops. You're trying to piecemeal them into the fight. And that was very effective. And it worked in war games. It worked in experimentation. And we knew it was going to work on the battlefield. And examples of air-land battle, you could see that in Desert Storm 1 and Desert Storm 2, where we overwhelmed the adversary because of these capabilities. A more modern day example of a concept is one called convergence. Sure. And back in 1990, General Gordon Sullivan was the chief of staff of the Army. And he went to several places to say, I want you guys to think about the future and give me some ideas on concepts. So he went to the history department at West Point. Fortunately, I was there teaching military history, and he took about a group of 5 officers and said, you guys work on thinking about the deep future coming out of Desert Storm. One of the ideas we came up with was convergence. This idea of bringing multiple capabilities, physical, virtual, cognitive, onto a single point. Okay. So just think about that. And I guess an example I would give of convergence is you've got these, you've got air, you got land, you got sea, you've got cyber and space, but it's not very well integrated. You've got to integrate all of these into a single point, single operation, single purpose, and then you're going to be much more effective. General Sullivan liked that, but that idea really didn't take hold till 2018. It was almost 30 years later before the force accepted convergence, and now we have just a score of different experiments dealing with Project Convergence being one of them, bringing these capabilities together. So I would say those are 2 examples of a concept. They don't happen overnight, and if you're looking deep, you can then start bringing those technologies and capabilities together with a purpose, not for the sake of the technology for itself.
And you mentioned, Bob, the special operations cyberspace triad that General Braga is so fond of, and it's sort of core to a lot of what you do and how you think about these concepts. But going hand in hand with that, as you were just explaining how war has changed. You mentioned from what we were looking at in Vietnam, and then into Europe and so forth. You've written about what you call sort of the future character of war, how what's going to be happening 15 years from now, and maybe we might be seeing some of it now in action in the Ukraine conflict. very different than the conflicts of yesteryear. Talk a little bit about some of what you write about in terms of this changing character of land warfare specifically.
And I would say that this view that I'm going to talk about is kind of building consensus in a number of areas. I'm not the only one saying this. I've heard the Navy senior officers speaking about this character of war changing. I've heard the Air Force talking about it. The Army certainly is talking about it. And so this is something that is also an outgrowth of studying the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict that happened a couple of years ago, and the Ukraine conflict that really is unfolding in front of our eyes in terms of how technologies and capabilities are fitting on the battlefield. And what does this mean? What are the insights? What are the implications for the future of war? And one thing that at least our group is seeing in concepts is that second-tier states like Ukraine and Poland and others may be able in the future to be able to participate in a conflict with near-peer capabilities. They can hold their own against a nation state with tremendous power. And what's allowing them to do this? So the technology that's emerging is helping us. So precision technology that started probably in the late 90s is maturing even faster now. So greater amounts of precision, greater amounts of lethality. The ranges are certainly getting further. We're talking about PRISM systems and next generation long range precision fires that are several thousand kilometers that they can reach out and hit something that far with accuracy. And you've seen a score of precision technologies on the battlefield, Javelin being one, which the U.S. developed, is a precision weapon against armored vehicles, but it can use against other targets. HIMARS has been a tremendous success in terms of ability to rapidly shoot and scoot. So you can shoot and within seconds, pick up that tactical vehicle, move to a different location before they can even find you. And the Russians still are not able to do a counter fire on the HIMARS successfully because those limited number of systems that are extremely effective but surviving on the battlefield. So that means that this technology is outpacing what a peer state can do in terms of countermeasures. DPICM, those sub-bomblets that are able to quickly, rapidly disperse and provide almost like a minefield or multiple munitions that can destroy targets. Drone swarms, and we only talked about that before. We saw them in the Nagorno-Karabakh. Now they're being used on a larger scale in the Ukraine conflict, where you can have hundreds of discrete drones with multiple capabilities on them. They can have different sensors. They can use ISR. They can use imagery. They can have precision targeting. They can have explosives on them. They can probably in the future have missiles on them. We've already seen examples of that in terms of the Turkish drone that they have. But more and more, these drone swarms are going to be prevalent. And then coupled with satellite imagery communications, GPS, next generation GPS, APNT, they're going to be highly effective. So this whole idea of really cheap, ubiquitous, distributed weaponry on the battlefield is going to make it harder and harder for a peer state to be able to be as effective as they were in the past. They're not going to overwhelm the defense. So there's kind of a paradox of change going on. And the paradox is we have had a trend in the past of investing in exquisite, high-end, multi-billion-dollar systems, and that's worked well for us. But there's coming a time in the future when those multi-billion-dollar systems are going to be countered with cheap, ubiquitous, precision technologies that is going to cost a fraction of what that multi-billion-dollar system costs. So we've got to realize that the battlefield is changing. We have to have a plan B, and we can't continue to do the same thing and expect to have the same results. Other aspects of the battlefield, I think, is going to be hiders and seekers. More and more, we're going to see this ubiquitous technology surveillance environment, UTS, where sensors are going to get cheaper, more accurate, multi-int, multimodal, dispersed, You could have a robot the size of a mosquito sitting somewhere, and you have no idea that that mosquito is collecting on you. You could have you could have sensors, on the ground that you can't even recognize, and they're collecting on you. And with communications getting better, and with edge AI allowing us to process information at the edge, not bringing all of that data back to the rear, but processing it forward on the battlefield and sharing it between ground sensors. Since I predict you're going to see more and more of ground sensors and aerial sensors sharing information between themselves without any humans in the loop. They're going to have great situation awareness at the tactical edge and be able to make decisions on their own at the tactical edge. It may not be a lethal decision. It may not be to put a round on somebody, because we definitely want a human in that loop.
Right.
They'll be able to remission, have a different purpose. They could, provide screening. They can provide, obstacle clearance. They could do a number of things that are not lethal, and do it on their own. So,
right.
so you can imagine this, and this is a trend that everybody's talking about. And we as a military have to figure out how to hide in plain sight.
Right.
So how do you get, a soldier to be on this lethal battlefield with, ground autonomous systems and aerial systems flying all around, and hide for them? So AI may play a very important role in terms of being proactive and poisoning the data, corrupting the data that's out there of the adversary, multimodal, multispectral camouflage, managing their signatures so that multiple areas of the spectrum, you cannot see that operator. And I think there's lots of investment going on there. There's going to be a lot of success in terms of hiding in plain sight. We can already see now that there are certain companies investing in how do you fool artificial intelligence.
Right.
I know the Canadians have done things like putting pieces of tape on a stop sign, and the AI will think it's something else, like a bicycle, because because it just looks at things differently. So you can actually put reflective tape on certain things, and the AI machine is spoofed. Right. And so confused, and so we have to get smarter at that in terms of manipulating data for counter artificial intelligence and being able to hide in plain sight. I think you're going to see the emergence of the superiority of the defense. Not a lot of people like to talk about that, because we are offensive-minded force, but the defense in the early stages of the next conflict is going to be far superior than the offense.
Okay.
You don't want to put your capital, weapon systems out front, because there's so much surprise that's going to happen at the tactical and operational levels, that you want to save your capital weapon systems for when you're ready for and the offense may not happen for years. It might take a couple of years before you know enough of the enemy system to go on the offense. So, but it could be a matter of 3 to 6 months. If you have rapid change, you can identify what the adversary is doing, and then maybe in a few months be able to go on the offense. Right. But starting off any conflict, the defense will be far superior than the offense, because of the precision, ubiquitous, cheap technologies that are out there. And this is another perspective. I don't know if it's popular, but the emergence of irregular warfare. We can see the Ukrainians using it very effectively, where irregular warfare is happening simultaneously with conventional warfare. More and more, there's a blending of the two right on the forward edge of the battlefield. And they're effectively using cell phones in the hands of others that are not necessarily soldiers. It could be anybody, but those cell phones have tremendous power, computing power, communication power. They have apps on them that can do amazing things, to include taking pictures and having stories made, by other people other than the military, and giving them to their public affairs teams, and be able to get the message out quickly, faster than the adversary can. You're going to have this blending of irregular warfare and conventional warfare simultaneously. I think the Department of Defense is recognizing this, slowly moving this, but you still have people that think about conventional warfare and irregular warfare as happening separately in
Right.
terms of time and space and distance. But in reality, they're going to be happening at the same time. So, and that's a plus for our command that really recognizes the value of irregular warfare. I think we're going to be including more and more into war planning and into future scenarios, and will make a tremendous difference on this future battlefield. And then artificial intelligence, I think that's something that's quite obvious to everyone. At the strategic, operational, and tactical levels, AI is going to have a huge impact. It's almost becoming like electricity. Everybody's going to need AI. We don't even recognize that we're using AI in our day-to-day lives, but it's ubiquitous.
Right.
Because it's, you just Google, it's using algorithms that is using artificial intelligence. At the strategic level, I think it's going to be used for how to counter complex adaptive systems. You can be able to do thousands and thousands of runs in AI to look for the weaknesses and vulnerabilities in the enemy's strategic systems and how they communicate and how they effectively orchestrate plans and operations. AI will be used to link the services of our military and agencies, so simultaneously they can share information and share content and get better situational awareness. So the common operational picture of the battlefield at the strategic level will be much more available and much more seamless. At the operational level, I think this triad that General Braga has envisioned is going to be very powerful. So think of the triad in the past, and this is even the recent past. We operate in stovepipes, and you might hear that a lot in your interviews with other people. Space operates, they just talk to people from space. They rarely talk to folks. They rarely integrate with folks outside of the space community. Same with cyber. It's almost like they're all by themselves. They're not really talking to the operations and tactical people. They're doing their own thing. And SOF, of course, we're not everywhere. But I think General Braga's vision is to bring these three communities together, not just for discussions, but to integrate their capabilities.
Right.
So I know you've probably, heard of that game or played this game, rock, paper, scissors, when you're a kid.
Of course.
When, one side says, I'm going to give you a stone, the other side simultaneously says, well, I'm going to give you a paper. So that's a confrontation that the paper is going to win. Right. Then one side says, well, I'm going to show you a scissors. And then you say, I'm going to show you a rock. And then the one with the scissors wins. So that's how warfare normally occurs. You have one side do something, another side counters, one side, and they're all pretty much singular dimensions. So air combatants fight air combatants, naval combatants fight naval combatants, ground combatants fight ground combatants. But envision a future where one side says, I'm going to show you a rock, and the other side has 5 different capabilities. That's what, General Braga's idea is. We're going to have multiple capabilities that are already seamlessly connected. And they're sharing capabilities so that you have synergy between the two. So you got space and cyber creating a new capability. Right. Cyber and soft having a new capability. Space and soft having new capability, using our placement and access to extend the reach far beyond what they can normally do, to look at the vulnerabilities of the enemy systems and using all three to penetrate and do other things to it that you cannot do by a single service. I can foresee where General Braga is probably going to integrate other capabilities in the future, but already, there's decades of combinations that occur when you have soft, cyber, and space already linking their capabilities. And so I think it's going to be very powerful. It's in the early stages. So he's signed a memorandum of agreement between Space and Missile Defense Command, SMDC, in the Army, and Army Cyber Command, and General Braga already have a 3-way agreement to not only develop capabilities together, but experiment, put them on the battlefield, get them in the dirt, get them working so that when conflict starts, it's not a cold start. Right. And so tremendous potential operation. And at the tactical level, I can see a lot of things going on with AI, edge AI, multimodal communications, and access to the cloud, tactical clouds, where you can have artificial intelligence in the tactical cloud. And now you've got operators on the ground that can use AI at their fingertips to dynamically iterate solutions far away from their headquarters that are in the rear. So edge AI, I think, is going to happen, which will dramatically increase things like speed, range, and lethality. Will in terms of their ability to improve in how fast they operate, the ranges they're going to deal with, and the lethality will increase. So in the future, what's going to be important is the cycle of adaptation. How fast can your site adapt to what's going on? And you can see that already, even in modern warfare, it's changed a lot. In World War II, the German army, they not World War II, World War I, the German army attacked with a very lethal system against the Europeans, and they had that great line of defense that started to lead to trench warfare. It took the German army 2 years to adapt. Between 1914 to end of 1916 to come up with new technologies, new capabilities, new methods to start doing what they call the Houdier tactics, to be able to Bruckmüller tactics, to break through the trench lines. Think about that. It took 2 whole years, maybe longer than 2 years, to experiment and do this. And at the same time, they had to adapt their defense. So the German elastic defense also took about 2 years for them to come up with a new defense system that was very dispersed, very distributed, had a large mobile reserve, and allowed the Western Front to move into their defensive network, but able to be very resilient and hold a line with much less troops. But today, you can already see, watching the Russian-Ukraine conflict, how both sides are adapting within a month or months. It's not taking them 2 years. In 2 months, you can see huge changes going on in operations and tactics, and even at the strategic level. So in the future, if the U.S. takes advantage of all these capabilities like AI and the cloud, and with working together with ideas like convergence, where you can adapt maybe under that period of 2 months, you can do much quicker, and that's going to determine who is more successful on the battlefield. One of the ideas that we're kicking around in our concept section is also this idea of prototype warfare, where you can rapidly develop a prototype on the battlefield using edge AI, edge capabilities, use 3D printing, additive manufacturing, and the operator can also be the producer of the new capability, linked to the rear, so you can get knowledge, capabilities, and other things given to them, but digitally manufacture on the front the capabilities, so you can have prototype warfare going on at the tactical edge. So that's just an idea, but you can see as we move into the future, the possibilities that will be given to the U.S. military.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and as you call it in your writings, the character of war. I mean, it's definitely changed, and the ability, as you were saying, to speed these innovations up as time goes by, as the systems are constantly learning. I mean, it's going to be instrumental in future conflicts. Bob, as you're talking about things like AI, sort of, you mentioned cheap, ubiquitous, and then you add the smart component in. A lot of what you were saying sort of resonated with me. I had Admiral Selby on last week, and he was talking about similar tools in terms of the Navy, and sort of when the swarm comes in, the AI makes a decision when the phalanx gun can go off and all that. And obviously, the parallels here are pretty obvious. When we get to special operations, though, and I think of from my Hollywood exposure, obviously the Green Berets and the Navy SEALs and so forth, we got these really tough guys and women in the process. But this leads into something else that you just talked about in terms of robotics, because we can make all sorts of neat little robots. But yeah, there's a comment. I think I saw the tagline somewhere in some of the Army material recently that hey, robots don't bleed. talk about, because I know, you've, offline you mentioned a little, we joked a little bit about Iron Man and Tony Stark and all that stuff. There's some stuff you played around with in the past that you shelved, but talk a little bit about sort of where you see us when we talk about special operations specifically, where the robotics potentially can get us, because, obviously you mentioned you always have a human in the loop here when we're dealing with these smart systems, but at the end of the day, robots don't bleed. So balance that one out for us here.
Yeah. So robotics is a huge movement that's going on, and we're Army Special Operations, so a lot of our large investments are going to be done by the service, just like the Navy SEALs rely heavily upon large investments being done by the U.S. Navy.
Right.
So we have to pay attention to where those large investments are going on with the Army, and the Army is going in a big way on robotics. Army Research Laboratory is doing a lot of experiments with those. And so it's not just unmanned aerial systems. It's also unmanned ground systems that we're really getting into the hows, because with the technology is already there to have ground robotics. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of those videos of the pack mule, being able to, take large weights over long distances across country. That technology has been around for a while now, and it's just maturing more and more. I'm sure you've seen those videos of almost like robot-like soldiers, where they're able to make independent decisions. They can use weapons. They can run. They can move around obstacles. They can communicate. It's just going to get more and more advanced. So really, the question is, how do you now work with man-machine teaming? Because we don't think that the full answer is all robots. There's going to have to be a human in the loop, because you don't want a lethal weapon system out there making decisions on its own that doesn't have human oversight. We don't want atrocities to be committed. We don't want things to happen that that left to their own devices. So you've got to have a human on the loop. So a lot of the exploration now is that man-machine interface. How do you communicate with those robotic systems? How do you make decisions for them? What decisions can they make? That hasn't been sorted out. I mean, we're still experimenting with what you're going to allow the robots to decide to do. There's no doubt that they are capable of making those decisions. But now you also have to link them to aerial systems. So you're going to have more and more unmanned aerial systems operating at low altitudes on the battlefield. And they're going to be spotting, they're going to be detecting, they're going to be, in some cases, using lethal weaponry if you allow them to do that. And they'll be making decisions at machine speed. So this interface between ground unmanned systems and aerial unmanned systems, and their ability to communicate with each other and to do missions together with humans on the loop, is probably the next step that's going to occur, is combined arms operation with robots with humans on the loop. So you may not see a soldier out there with them. So especially in the covering force, where you're forward of the line of troops, you need somebody out there that's doing reconnaissance, that's screening, that's preventing the adversary from finding you for a counter sensor fight. So somebody has to be out there blinding the adversary, taking out their eyes, taking out their sensors, and corrupting their data. This more and more can be done by robots. It doesn't have to be a human that's forward of the battlefield trying to do that. More and more, you're going to shift towards unmanned systems, almost having a covering force area on the battlefield. I know folks are talking about it. I don't think that they've solidified their views about this yet, but it's in discussion that as we see more and more advances, you're going to have to adapt to a battlefield that is partially manned by robots. So you may have, a right flank of a battlefield that's just covered by a sector. Those are just robots. There are no humans there, and that if you fire in that area, you're going to be killing a robot, but you're not killing a human.
Right.
And so how do you deconflict fires? Also,
right.
Be a question. We don't want fratricide occurring where the robots or the UASs are, shooting at U.S. soldiers. You have to identify friend or foe. you have to have some control measures on the ground to be able to protect the humans. But more and more, I think this shift is occurring. The danger, if the U.S. does not do this, is that the adversaries do it, and then it's a lopsided battlefield. They're using thousands of robots, the ground and the air, and we're not. You don't want that to happen.
Right.
So we've got to at least have the technology, the capabilities, the training, the thinking, the refinement, so that when it does happen, it doesn't catch us by surprise.
Right.
So I think, and then more and more use of the tactical cloud systems. Why shouldn't a robot be able to tap into the cloud and heal its software?
Yep.
Why does it have to go to the rear to get it fixed? Why can't it get why can't the robot man its own 3D printer and print the part that it needs to, fix its robot buddy, on the battlefield? We've got to think, more forward leaning with artificial intelligence, cloud capability, secure communications, and robotic systems that are very agile, very lethal, at tremendous speed, and can make decisions a lot faster than human decisions. I think you've seen the technology, the Chat GPT that was introduced.
Sure.
It's already showing the tremendous capability that a machine has to think independently, to digest thousands of pieces of information, put it together, and come out with a coherent, a document that makes sense to the average person reading it. That's just the start of what we can see with AI being given as a decision aid to soldiers. So soldiers should each have at some point access to this, Chat GPT that's in the tactical cloud, and provided, to any soldier on the battlefield. So if he's got a situation he doesn't know how to deal with, or a complex repair that needs to be done to a robot, that should be available to them. So I can see, lots of change going on the tactical battlefield. So, the special operations community, Army Special Operations, has to be aware of these things. We don't have a lot of investment dollars, so we're going to have to, partner with the services. SOCOM is going to help us out a lot. But really access to other folks that have, the investment dollars, like DARPA, SCO, and others that can invest significant amounts of funds towards those capabilities. But we already see it coming. So part of our job at Concepts is to be aware, and then, let our commanders know that you may not see this coming, but this is the impact it's going to have on the battlefield.
And Bobby, you mentioned, as you were talking about some of the countermeasures and so forth, that, obviously our military has lethal capability, but there are also non-lethal capability. And this theme came up in a couple of our shows that we've done on the topic of directed energy technology, in the sense that, yes, we can create really great laser beams to knock down drones. At the same time, there's all these neat dazzlers and microwave technologies, not don't kill, but push people back and can cause a little irritation here and there. If there's for crowd control and all that bit. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you see in terms of the development of the directed energy space as it pertains to special ops?
Yeah. So when you say special ops, I mean, I think it's going to be available to a lot of different services.
Sure.
Already, a lot of services are using it, and the Navy is using it significantly. On their ships. The Army is using it significantly on their ground systems. I think you've seen that, where they're exploring putting the 50 kilowatt type of capability, so they can be able to engage unmanned aerial systems. I think the special ops community is going to need access, and I'm sure that already asking for access to those systems, because we also are going to experience unmanned aerial systems on the battlefield. And right now, a lot of those countermeasures have to do with electronic warfare.
Right.
But in the future, it's almost like this action, counteraction and then a countermeasure that the adversary is going to adapt, and they're going to find a way to get around, the electronic jamming of their unmanned aerial systems. They're going to use their own navigation to be able to be autonomous and not be connected electronically to its mother system. So, because of this countermeasures that will be taken by drones, we have to have other means of shooting them down. Right. So counter ram systems, obviously, but I think that directed energy weapons is one of the portfolio of solutions that special operations will need. We're going to have some way of mounting them on small platforms, which technologically is feasible, so that we can shoot down drones too. Because it's the scale of what's concerned. You might be able to shoot down, a handful of them, but can you shoot down, several hundred, armed drones coming after formation? So, just like everybody else, because the special operations unit is going to be operating independently and on its own, you can't rely on anybody else to protect you. Every formation will have to protect themselves. So, directed energy, I think, in terms of lasers, have already shown to be effective in taking off a prop or an arm or a appendage of a drone. But now also high powered microwaves are all also being explored, because you want to have a suite of capabilities, and high powered microwaves have already been experimented with by a number of countries. They're effective. We know that they work. And you can use high-powered microwaves in a very concentrated fashion against a drone swarm and be effective. But for the special operations community, how do you get that system in a way that can be transported to the front? How do you move that thing around? Can you keep it, light, mobile, and effective with enough power to do its job? So that's the challenge. And I know that we're tied to the Army's investments, and there's the big dollar investments will probably be coming from the Army and SOCOM. So we're looking for them to be continue to advance. I know Army Research Laboratory is doing a tremendous amount of work with directed energy weapons. I was where back in the 90s, we had lots of experiments with lasers and megawatt type of lasers in the desert, because they saw the huge potential. I think that they were told to scale back then because it was getting too dangerous and starting to be dangerous to our, Air Force and naval brethren. So they told them to scale back. But that technology is there. So it's just a matter of saying, okay, let's go back and reinvest in some of those capabilities. I think directed energy will certainly be on the next battlefield. And there's also improvements being made in EMP. And so that's another whole range of weapons that I can't talk much about, and I'm not really much in the know in EMP weapons in terms of being able to share that, but that is another category of weapons that will be effective on the tactical battlefield.
Absolutely. While we're on the topic of energy, directed energy, let's just segue for a moment to because I know one area that you spend time thinking about are just future energy technologies, and obviously the services have always been at the forefront of this in terms of whether the hydrogen cells or mini nuclear reactors and submarines and so forth. Any interesting, innovative technologies that you're particularly excited about, specifically in the concepts group when it comes to future energies?
Yeah, so part of my exposure to this idea of alternate sources of energy came when I was working for the Army. So part of my background is I worked for TRADOC. I had 3 tours at TRADOC as the chief of the initiatives group. I was chief of the plans. I worked in their concepts division at TRADOC. And at that time, there was a General Michael Vane was a director of ARCIC back then, Army Capabilities Integration Center. And this is probably like 20 years ago, was thinking about the possibility of mini nuclear reactors that could provide autonomous power for base camp operations.
Okay.
So in the sense that if you're going to have a base camp that's going to be out there a long distance from your airfield or from the port, how do you sustain this base camp, whether it's a brigade combat team or a battalion that's out there on its own, without having to mobily transport thousands of gallons of fuel to this?
Yeah.
And he envisioned back then that mini nuclear reactors at the time could be placed on a military van, a 30-foot van, and transported to the battlefield, set up operations. You could effectively power an entire base camp with these mini nuclear reactors, and then you wouldn't worry about having to transfer the fuel, but you could connect your defensive systems, on the perimeter. You could power all your lights. You could recharge all your generators and pretty much operate independently for some time. If you had some of your systems that could be using electrical transportation, you recharge them. So he envisioned it back in like the early 2000s, and lo and behold, now this technology is maturing where there are other countries investing now in these mini nuclear reactors that can be put aboard ship, and you can send them to an area that needs power. You can power a community with a miniature nuclear reactor.
Yeah.
So beyond the U.S., others thinking about this, especially as the price of coal and gas and other forms of combustible power gets more and more expensive, that it becomes an alternative. Now, I think it's going to be difficult for the special operations community to integrate something like mini nuclear reactors, but it may be something for their base camps. So if you've got a headquarters that's located in a very austere location, there's a possibility that you could possibly put the mini nuclear reactor out there for the services. They might have a large headquarters with hundreds of people. They might put a nuclear reactor in, and they're getting safer and safer in terms of ability to shut them down quickly and to protect their the fuel that's being used. But I think there's going to be some usage of mini nuclear reactors for the Department of Defense in the future as this technology matures. I think hydrogen is a little bit more challenging because it's much more combustible, more difficult to transport. But I'm sure there are going to be some folks like ARL looking at hydrogen as a form of power. But I think electric also, hybrid vehicles. We're already looking at hybrid vehicles that can plug into the electrical grid or use diesel. The combination of hybrid electric vehicles, as we look towards more austere environments like the Arctic, which is even harder to get fuel out there. How are you going to set up a base camp in the Arctic? That might be a mini nuclear reactor just to survive in the Arctic, because it's going to cost so much to get fuel on a regular basis to those locations that we may be forced into going down that mini nuclear reactor path. And the Arctic is certainly an area that we've got to develop. And more of our adversaries are moving into that space. With of course warming going on, there's going to be more and more naval access to the Arctic. It's a future area of confrontation with great powers. We've got to be able to innovate now to be able to provide that energy capability. And as more and more there's concern about global warming, we have to get in the space of energy innovation. I know that DARPA and ARL and others are investing a lot in there. We're just monitoring what's going on, but we can see some advantages with those kinds of capability in austere environments. If you got a little chance to talk about Steve Jobs, I hope you get a chance to do that.
Yeah, that's coming. I just want to one more thing before we get to Steve Jobs. I want to get to the book, but I just want to ask you a quick question. As you got me thinking, because as we're talking about all these technologies, whether it's AI, robotics, the novel and energy technologies, and so forth, one of the things that we've also been able to do with the show is to profile some of the groups at the Pentagon that sort of act like venture capital organizations. Well, they really are venture capital organizations like AFWorks, NavalX, and so forth, and sort of this this connection between the defense community and defense tech private sector. Say just a couple words about that, if you would. I mean, at the concepts division, when you are thinking, 10, 15, 20 years out, are you getting involved much with the private sector at this stage? I mean, if you have to bring in experts that, are not just thinking of AI in 2023, but AI in 2038 and so forth. Do you do much interaction sort of with the private community?
We try to do a monthly futures forum that USPACOM sponsors, and the futures forum is open to the academic. It's open to the entrepreneurial sector. A lot of businesses are interested in presenting to our futures forum, but we try to have a marriage where there's a new startup company that has a technology that would be something that we would be interested. So typically, our office will screen, I don't know, 5 to 10, different entrepreneurs that, in a course of a week that want us to have them talk at the futures forum, and we try to see if that fits in our interests, in terms of, but we do have CEOs of companies that will present, new UAS capabilities, new communications capabilities. Earlier, I would say in the 2018, 2019 period, we had a lot of artificial intelligence.
Got it.
Presenters. One of them from ESIRI presented on the ability of artificial intelligence to do predictive templating. So imagine, you have a area of the battlefield that you already know the terrain, you already know kind of the layout of where the adversary would be and where the U.S. would be. He had a program that could use artificial intelligence to template where every weapon system would be located. So instead of sending your drone out now to look at the whole battlefield for a radar system, AI would template here are where the radar systems would be located based on terrain and range. And here's where the long range precision fire systems would be located. Here's where the air defense batteries would be located. So that was amazing that they were leaning forward already using AI to predictively template the battlefield. It makes it a lot simpler for planners instead of the planners taking out their manual trying to figure out, based on distances, where systems would go. AI would already have done all the homework and would give you a layout that you can then, either verify or say, no, it's not there, but you have a much smaller number of areas to research. So that was an example of a AI research. But I would say the 2018 to 2020 period, we had a lot of artificial intelligence briefers. But now it's pretty much mainstream, and so we get a lot of robotics presentations.
Got it.
A lot of drone presentations, a lot of counter drone capabilities that are given to us. So if it fits kind of in the sweet spot where we're interested in it, we have a futures forum, and anybody in your network can certainly send us their briefings that we can and it goes out to the entire RSOF community. But the Army got interested in it too. So all of the Army Centers of Excellence also dial in. So we might have, I guess the average would be 150 organizations or representatives will dial in for an average futures forum. So that's good because it's across Army and across the Special Operations community. And it depends on the topic. So we normally will send a briefing out probably about a week in advance, a week, 2 in advance. It says, here's what's going to be briefed. Here's the technology they're going to be talking about, and then that would attract the listeners to the Army Futures, our USPACOM Futures Forum. And we also run a USPACOM Deep Fires Forum. The Deep Fires is getting into the deep areas of the battlefield, but that one is more for classified material. So if you have a contractor that can, provide a briefing in the classified space, then we've had a few contractor briefs there too to educate us on what new capabilities. So we're always looking for new capabilities, and I think the Futures Forum's got the word out to a lot of CEOs and other companies to be able to to share what they have. So it's
we will link to that as well in the bio of the show, Bob. So no, that's nice that you put that out there. But talk a little bit about Steve Jobs. I mean, you wrote the book, The Winning Habits of Steve Jobs. What motivated you in the middle of everything else that you are working on and thinking about to write a book about Steve Jobs?
I guess I went into this space because there are not a lot of good books that looked at him in terms of his habits and innovation.
Okay.
You know, there's been, you know, a lot of books talk about his biography in terms of events and rollouts, and, you know, but nothing that got into really good detail about innovation. I think Carmen Gallo put a book out, but I read it and there was very little there that I could take to say, you know, I want to really study innovation. So I'm just going to highlight just a few that I picked up on.
Okay.
One of them, of course, he called it connecting the dots. But one of them was repurposing. And I think we mentioned that before, but he was a master repurposing a particular technology and using it for, you know, in other areas. So in his case, you know, he was able to look at the Motorola cell phone, you know, and this is Motorola cell phones early on, and he wasn't happy with what the cell phones were doing with their, you know, their effectiveness, and he looked at the ability to marry that up with music, and so he said, you know, he was already interested in he had a lot of inventions in music, and he knew that the Motorola phone was already adding the camera to it, so they had the digital camera and the Motorola terms of communications, and he put the iPod capabilities on it, and that was one of the first steps that led towards the iPhone. So repurposing, I think, and we're in the military are really good at repurposing. The soldiers are probably the masters of repurposing, and the special operations guys are probably the master at repurposing things. They're probably the most innovative people that I know, because I think they're brought in, they're selected based on this persistence, their physical fitness, and their ability to innovate. And so they're naturally good at it. And I guess one of the stories that we hear a lot about repurposing, Normandy D-Day invasion, soldiers are, you know, all stuck on the, you know, in that peninsula, Cotentin Peninsula, trying to break out, and they have hedgerows, and these hedgerows where there's scores and scores of them. So the average company will have to breach something like, you know, 35 hedgerows, you know, to be able to break out of that country. And the early technology they were using was explosives, but it took so much explosives to punch a hole in a hedgerow to get, you know, a vehicle through, that they were saying it's going to take 17 tons of explosives for one company, you know, one tank company to break through. And one of the soldiers, lo and behold, you know, it's his name, Sergeant Cullen. He decided to weld a couple of metal plates on the front of a M4 tank, and these couple of plates, Rhino tanks they call them, was able to punch right through that hedgerow without even working hard. Whereas, you know, explosives take a long time to set up, and it takes masses of months of resupply to get them there. These Rhino tanks could break through, and they pretty much equipped all the tanks in the 2nd Armored Division, and they broke through the hedgerows with this repurposing of the tank for breaching missions. So that's an example of repurpose. So repurposing is one that I think we like, and it's one that Steve Jobs was good at. But I think the other thing I'm impressed with him was this idea of cross-discipline exploration. So he was always looking at a completely different discipline. And the example I used earlier was music. So he saw the huge potential with music, that music was doing its own thing and the computer was doing its own thing. But what happened if you had a merger of music and computers, so that, you know, we could, you know, it was already moving towards digitalization, with Napster was already downloading music, you know, to computers, and then they were creating their files and they're giving it to all their friends. So they're bypassing the whole entire commercial system. Steve Jobs didn't like that. So he thought, what about providing that capability? So he procured a company called SoundJam that was able to download and create a jukebox-like application, so he could file, navigate, store, compress files, share them, and then be able to sell them. He created iTunes, which is very innovative out of the music industry, and then the iPod followed. And the iPod was taking 1,000 songs and putting them one disc and putting it on a handheld device. That later led him to then combine, of course, iPod with the cell phone, but also add a digital camera, communications, the internet, computing, and later satellite technology, merging all those capabilities. So I like this idea that he first looked at another completely separate discipline and says, how can I use my discipline and that discipline, merge them, and then integrate? So that's tremendous insight for the military. And I think General Braga is one that naturally is thinking in this way. Look at different communities like space and cyber and soft, and they all have different problem-solving techniques they use. They have different skill sets. They have different capabilities. But now when you start to merge them, you create something completely new that nobody's seen before. And that's the vision that I think he has. It's going to have tremendous impact. It's not just a soft cyberspace triad. It's going to be other coupling. So what if you coupled robotics and the cloud?
Okay.
What if you think of all the things going on robotics and they do their own thing, but you couple it with everything going on with the cloud and you merge AI, cloud technology, with robotics? You're going to have a completely new weapon system, a completely new way of fighting, a completely new advantage over the adversary that nobody has envisioned before. What if you coupled special operations with hypersonics? And that has a whole range of capabilities of hypersonics that can be ground or air launch, and you have the special operator that has placement and access. What if you couple that two together and you create a whole new list of capabilities that give you a new leap ahead? I think the senior commander's job is to identify those two completely disparate disciplines and say, what's the huge payoff that I can create by merging them two? So I thought it was beautiful that Steve Jobs kind of gave me that insight. When I saw that, I said, man, this guy's amazing. And then the third area I recognized was his ability to automate all of the back end, automate the logistics, automate the financing, automate all aspects of his company. And he brought in Tim Cook to take care of his supply chain. And he reduced the inventory from 2 months of supply in 1998. Within 18 months, in 1999, September, he reduced it to 2 days of supply in his inventory. So that tremendous savings for his company, but using automation now into all of the back office processes. So those are some insights I just want to share because I know you mentioned him earlier, but I think we can still learn from him because I think that most of the books are just written about his biography. They're not getting into what exactly did he create when he was there.
It's interesting. I'm just as you're going through these topics, they resonate. Like I come out of the pharmaceutical industry, and it's the same thing there. The repurposing of drug X to treat disease Y, and then of course the cross-disciplinary stuff. I mean, there's so many silos, but we won't get into that. That's for another show. But no, it's really fascinating, by the degree to which you delve into and can synthesize these topics, and I see why you're there at Concepts to think of these big picture issues for years down the road. So really fascinating set of projects you got going on there. For everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been spending time with Dr. Robert Taguchi, Chief of Concepts Division, Force Modernization Directorate at U.S. Army Special Operations Command down in Fort Bragg. Pick up a copy of his book, The Winning Habits of Steve Jobs. Pick up some of his other books on Amazon if you're interested in land warfare and the information age and the adaptability and flexibility of campaigns. A lot of really amazing information. Bob, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while about all these topics. Obviously, thank you for doing what you do and your long history of service to protecting our country. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow via what you do and think about on a daily basis. Really, really fascinating story.
Thank you. Great to be here. Greatly
Really
appreciate
great.
what you do for all of us.